You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 16th of October 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up.
Yes, senhores, o Banco Portugal, pedimos responsabilidade ao Banco Portugal, novo banco, CMVM, a grupo de trabalho.
10 years after the collapse of Portugal's biggest private bank, the trial begins of those accused of bringing it down. But a decade on, campaigners worry it's too late for justice to be done. Also coming up, why is Poland removing its right to asylum? The Prime Minister says it's down to Russia and Belarus pushing migrants over the border. But critics wonder whether it's to appease the right wing. We'll have more. Plus,
if authoritarian countries support each other, people from countries who believe in freedom and democracy have to support each other even stronger.
We find out how a Ukrainian Nobel Prize winner views the fight to keep freedom alive, plus why France is dressing up its electric cars in a very familiar garb. The papers come today from Nairobi, and we get the latest architecture news too. That's all ahead on The Globalist, live from London. First, a quick look at what else is happening in today's news. The US has given Israel 30 days to increase the amount of access to humanitarian aid to Gaza or risk a cut in military assistance. Israel has also launched another strike on the Lebanese capital, Beirut, in the last few hours. And North Korea says around 1.5 million young people have applied to join or return to the army this week alone. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, a decade ago, one of Portugal's biggest banking empires collapsed. It hit every kind of customer, from major shareholders to more modest everyday customers. Well, the demise of BES damaged Portugal's economy and its reputation. 10 years on, 2,000 of its clients are taking the former bankers to court and are demanding compensation and justice. But will it happen? To tell us more, I'm joined now from Lisbon by Michael Pereira, who's an investigative journalist and senior reporter at the leading Portuguese newspaper Expresso. He's been covering the story for the last decade. Good morning to you, Michael.
Good morning, Emma.
So just explain the background to this, how you followed this for the last 10 years.
Well, basically, I'm following this story since the very beginning, meaning the moment the bank collapsed in August 2014. That was also the moment that a criminal investigation was started by the General Prosecutor's Office here. And this has been the origin of many stories that have been publishing about mainly corruption and tax fraud and many of these kind of crimes that you can find in a bank that was working in a bad way for many years, basically.
What went wrong at BES?
Well, this bank, Banco Espírito Santo, has had the name of the family Espírito Santo, and it was a big surprise for Portuguese people because it was very respectable bank with roots dating back to the 19th century, and it's the banker, the man that was heading the bank, Ricardo Salgado, was known as the owner of all this. So he was a very powerful and respectable man in Portugal. And it was a shock. I mean, it was not expected. What we saw then in the last 10 years was evidence showing that to keep the bank running in the midst of a very hard financial crisis, this banker went to several jurisdictions and went after several, you would say, not so trustful partners. and just to have money enough to keep the control of the bank and to have the bank running. And this is what is going on in the last 10 years. These kind of stories that have been unfolded and exposed. And this is also part of what is going to be told in the trial that started yesterday.
Indeed. I mean, we have a trial which will take a very long time to go through. There are 300 crimes, 18 defendants, and 2,000 people who want to have their voice heard. I mean, how are they going to approach this, given the scale?
Well, these 2,000 victims of the bank, people that lost hundreds of thousands of euros with the misleading relation with the bank that tried to convince them to invest in something that was not good to invest. Basically, they are represented by 50 lawyers. And basically, they are there to support the prosecutors, and they hope that at the end they will get their money back. They are asking basically more than 300 million euros, and if at the end all these defendants are convicted, I believe they will have what they want.
There is a sense, though, that there have been regular protests, I should say, by these former customers of BES, that they were given or were offered solutions for them. They were offered money compensation, but very little of this money has actually materialised, which asks the bigger question that even from in the setting of a court, what is the chance of these people ever getting any of their money back?
Well, the banker that was heading BES, Banco Espírito Santo, tried to settle agreements with some of these people, but with a very short money. And basically, what you have now, it's a trial that is supported. I mean, the court seized around 1 billion euros in assets, and it's from these assets that these victims can be compensated. So it will be at the end a decision by the court and not by the defendants.
There is a fear, though, that you mentioned the former BES chairman Ricardo Salgado, who now has Alzheimer's, doesn't he? And the questions are very much being raised as to whether that will complicate issues when it comes to putting the man on trial. I mean, he's facing 65 offences, including criminal association, active corruption, forgery, qualified fraud, and money laundering.
Yes, and not only that, he has other criminal cases where he's a defendant. This is only 1 in 7 cases that he needs to be tried. So this is the first trial on the bank collapse, and he was already convicted in last June, in a sentence of 6 years in prison by something else, by corruption, for the fact of he corrupt basically a former minister of economy in Portugal. So he has a lot on his plate, and he has Alzheimer. This is the main line of defense that he has. I mean, that his lawyers are presenting, that he's not fit to be a trial. So, yes. But still, it's possible, even if he's not in good shape for a trial like this, and he has now 80 years old and he's really sick. There are conditions to make at least part of what people are expected to have, this justice with the victims of the bank, so to pay them back.
It's not just the victims who are watching this very closely, but also those concerned with the future of the financial sector in Portugal, given the fact that the amount of money that was lost in the BES scandal and the amount of trust that was lost in the Portuguese economy and financial institutions was significant, wasn't it? So what kind of wider economic repercussions were there for this scandal?
Well, it was really something very worrying in the last 10 years, especially just after the collapse happened, and there was the need of the government to intervene and to basically put money in the bank. So for a while, there was a lot of stress in the banking sector. But to be honest, in recent years, the Portuguese economy has been performing well, and banks got back to profits. And so I would say there's not such concerns. Concerns are much fewer than before. So I think we passed that phase.
There is always that remainder, though, isn't there, that we've passed that phase, but lessons must have been learned. What changed from within the Portuguese banking sector to ensure that this was never going to be repeated?
Well, there is a stronger regulation set system, and I would say that people that are usually used to cover financial institutions and banks are. I think they learn a lesson with this case, is that you should not trust anyone. You should do your homework and verify if institutions are as strong as they say. So this is a very, very, very clear lesson that we have with the Banco Espírito Santo case.
Michael Barrera, thank you so much for joining us on the line from Lisbon. You're listening to The Globalist. It's 8:11 a.m. in Warsaw, 7:11 a.m. here in London. Now, having built a reputation for being the country which welcomed Ukrainian refugees at the start of Russia's invasion, Poland is now trying to bring the shutters down. The country's Prime Minister Donald Tusk has temporarily removed the right to asylum in the country, blaming Russia and Belarus for pushing illegal migrants across the border. Well, the move has been criticised by human rights advocates who are asking whether Mr Tusk's decision has more to do with domestic politics. Well, to tell us more, I'm joined by Mateusz Mazzini, who's a Polish journalist, writer-at-large at Gazeta Wyborcza and lecturer in journalism at Collegium Civitas in Warsaw. Welcome back, Mateusz.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
What exactly has Donald Tusk said?
So during the party convention last Saturday, he actually announced a decision to introduce a regulation within the Polish legal framework to temporarily suspend or allow for a possibility to temporarily suspend the right to apply for any legal protection for incoming migrants. So basically, whoever comes into Poland, presumably via the border crossing with Belarus in the Białowieża forest, which is in the northeast of the country, could potentially be faced with a situation in which the right to apply for asylum will be denied. This is not yet certain that for the duration of that law or for the entirety of that duration, the right to apply for legal protection will be suspended. But Tusk is trying to give himself and his government the opportunity to do that, much like the Finnish government did in mid-July this year.
Just tell us a little bit about the background behind it. He is saying that Russia and Belarus are pushing illegal migrants across the border. To what extent is that true?
Well, it is true to a large extent, quite literally, because we're still facing situations in which we have groups of migrants being forcibly pushed over the borderline or even the border defensive installations by the Belarusian secret forces or uniform forces. But I think there are two things here that need to be said quite clearly. So in terms of the factual interpretation of what Tusk is actually trying to do, yes, this is a violation of the European legal framework. It is a violation of human rights and probably a number of very important international law documents. But on the other hand, you could argue that Tusk is not actually doing anything that's so much innovative in European politics. He basically said what a lot of politicians in Europe think and what a lot of voters in different countries in Europe want. I think we're going to get to that in a second. But yes, it is true. And he's actually reiterating that narrative this morning in a large interview with Gazeta Wyborcza, in which he says everybody knows that these migrants don't come here because they know that there is a crossing that's easy to traverse. They come here because they're shipped by Putin and Lukashenko, and those are two political autocrats that weaponize the very notion of migration to destabilize Polish and, as a result, NATO and European Union security. We have a growing number of instances in which there are clashes between migrants and the Polish border forces. Objects are being thrown across the border installations. One Polish soldier actually died as a result of that kind of confrontation a few months ago. So there is a grain of truth in what Tusk is saying, quite significantly, but obviously this should be and is already being disputed to what extent that decision is a legal one.
Apart from clashes at the border, tell us a little bit more about the passage of these illegal migrants and where they're coming from, what they're fleeing from, and what happens to them when they get to Poland.
So I think it's the classic complex situation of the European migration crisis, because we have people coming mostly from North Africa, Middle East, Afghanistan to a lesser extent. And obviously for a token European perspective, these countries seem to be all the same, or at least very similar, because they're economically underdeveloped, they're internally unstable. But according to international asylum regulations, they're very different, because there are countries like Yemen that actually face a perennial domestic military conflict, and countries like Afghanistan, which for all intents and purposes within the European legal perspective is not a country at war. We might not be the fans of the Taliban regime, but the fact is that for the European bureaucrats, including the Polish ones, it is a country in which you could live a stable life. Hence, you don't necessarily qualify for asylum or any sort of legal protection. So we have people from Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, especially recently, Somalia, Afghanistan, coming into Poland and almost immediately trying to get to Germany. I did a number of stories about the border. I spoke with activists that are actually trying to provide help and protection to those migrants. Most of them actually admitted that upon the first encounter, migrants will immediately ask, how long will it take for me to get to Berlin? They usually want to get to either Sweden or Germany because they have relatives there. And they're faced with a very tough choice, because if they apply for legal protection in Poland, they will no longer be legally allowed to live in another country of the European Union, because Poland is the first place where they cross physically the external European Union border. If they don't apply, they run the risk of being caught, and then will obviously will have to provide a very complex explanation to the German authorities. How on earth was that possible that actually Germany, that doesn't have an external border of the European Union, was the first country where they entered the EU?
Mateusz, you mentioned a moment ago the domestic political issues associated with this problem. At the end of last year, when Donald Tusk was elected and pushed the far-right government out of power, he inherited a very divided country. And as you mentioned, there are questions being asked about the decisions that he is making. To what degree is Tusk having to make the right noises to the far right in order to maintain some kind of control on the way that Poland's political direction is heading?
I think this is actually a case of trying to score points both domestically and internationally. So obviously within the context of domestic politics, we still have a very, very sharp rivalry between the Civic Platform, which is the party of Donald Tusk, currently in power, the largest party of the coalition government, and Law and Justice, which is still very popular with the electorate. And let's not forget, it is the grouping that actually won the election last year, just didn't manage to secure a working majority in the parliament. So obviously Tusk is to a certain extent, or actually to a large extent, repeating the rhetoric of Law and Justice, trying to outflank the right from the right by temporarily suspending any sort of migration practically. But also there is an European context here to be mentioned. As I said before, there is a growing tendency, even in mainstream politics in Europe right now, to limit migration or to actually try to court favors with the more right-wing, more radical electorate that demands that kind of move. And Tusk actually said that explicitly on Saturday, that he wants this solution to be uploaded on the European Union level to become the new normal standard of the European Union policy towards migration. And he, given the fact that he's a very close ally of Ursula von der Leyen, that he knows his ins and outs in the European People's Party, actually stands a chance of succeeding. And if he manages to be the one that actually introduces a completely new paradigm shift in European migration policy, then he obviously is going to claim credit and present himself as the leader that actually manages to represent the interest of Polish people in the European Union.
Indeed, I mean, Europe is struggling with the issue of illegal migration. I think last year there were like 350,000 people who entered the EU irregularly, which is the highest number since 2016. And given what you've just said, Mateusz, in terms of the position that Donald Tusk occupies within Europe and his closeness to the European Commission, how much do you think that what Tusk's decision does will resonate across the EU? And indeed, how much can the EU help Poland with its border control?
Well, I think it already resonates quite a lot. We did have a critical comment on behalf of the European Commission office that Ursula von der Leyen reminded Poland of the obligation that stemmed from both European and international law. But let's not forget that, as I said before, Poland is really not the first country within the European Union to suspend the right to apply for asylum. The Finnish government did that 2.5 months ago. But also Spain legalized pushbacks by means of an internal legal regulation already in 2015. So even though we don't yet have public voices of support or declarations of support for Donald Tusk's move, I think this is going to be something, or is already something, that's being welcomed, perhaps quietly so far, but still welcome nonetheless in many European capitals, because, as I said before, this is what a lot of people in Europe want. They might not necessarily be happy with the fact that political leaders are saying quite openly that they will violate someone's basic human rights, which this is what the decision accounts for. But at the end of the day, they want lower numbers of migrants. We saw that in the recent election in Austria with the triumph of the Austrian Freedom Party. We know what's happening in Germany, where the sentiments of the openly anti-migration party AfD is actually being taken over by the mainstream CDU-CSU. Britain also has its own fair share of migration issues in domestic politics. So I think Tusk is again demonstrating the capacity of having supreme, very efficient reading of what the mainstream of European politics demands right now.
Mateusz Mazzini, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. Still to come on today's programme.
Technology is advancing at breakneck speed, but with so many possibilities for where this tech could take us, it can be hard to predict what is going to happen next and the new problems that will crop up.
We head to Singapore to explore the risk of design, or the role of design, I should say, in emerging tech. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
Welcome back. Let's continue with today's newspapers. Joining me from Nairobi is Nivina Koto, Monocle's Nairobi correspondent. Good morning.
Good morning, Emma.
You know what to do.
It's a really beautiful day. We had a little drizzle yesterday, but I think I'll be able to have lunch outside.
Thank you very much indeed. Oh, what do you have? I'll ask you now. What are you having for lunch?
I don't know yet.
Okay, fine. We'll come to that a little bit later on. First, though, let's have a look at the newspapers. As you've been thinking about your lunch, you've also been scouring the papers for us. And one of them is an incredibly strong story from The Star about Ukraine denying supplying weapons to Mali. This stems from a tale in Le Monde.
Yes, exactly. Le Monde, a newspaper, reported that Ukrainian drones were providing support for Tuareg rebels that are fighting against the central government in Mali. The Ukrainian government yesterday really came out with a strong statement denying these allegations. The allegations are that it supplied drones to rebels, the Tuareg rebels fighting against the Malian army and Russian mercenaries there. The story is pretty much all over the African papers and the international papers this morning. I think it's important to explore the background a bit. In summer, there was an attack on the central government soldiers supported by Russian troops. And in that attack, a record number of Russian fighters and Malian soldiers were killed. After that, the Malian government cut ties to Ukraine, saying that Ukraine was supporting had supported these rebels. So I think this is the outcome of this spat that has been going on for the last couple of months.
It's an astonishing story, the fact that Ukraine, of all nations, is in a position whereby it can be accused of supplying weapons to other people, to other groups.
Yes, there is an accusation that Ukraine is basically, the conflict between Ukraine and Russia is playing out in countries like Mali and countries like Niger, that Ukraine is getting involved, and the analysis on this is kind of split as to whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. There's some people argue that Ukraine has lost the plot in Africa, that it should be very careful not to repeat the mistakes of the Cold War in places like Mali. There are other people who argue that this is kind of required because Russia is so strong in establishing ties in the Sahel and exploiting these ties. So it's very difficult to fact check these stories or actually report from the ground, because it's almost impossible to get visas to investigate this in these countries. But I think we will hear more of this in the coming days.
Indeed. I mean, Le Monde has reported extensive on this, and this is effectively Ukraine trying to target Russian forces outside of the immediate conflict.
Yes, exactly. I mean, from what I understand, the defeat in late July, August was the heaviest ever African defeat for what used to be called Wagner, what is now being renamed as the Africa Corps, Russian fighters. And I think it was a very serious defeat and very serious attack. So I think it's a conflict that we have to keep an eye on.
Let's move to Kenya and the issue of trying to remove the deputy president.
Yes. So as I am speaking at 9 o'clock, about 20 minutes ago, the Senate hearing got underway to determine whether Kenya's deputy president, Rigathi Gachagua, should be impeached and should be removed from office. He has 11 charges against him, including a gross violation of the constitution, undermining the president, irregular accusation of wealth, and so on and so forth. If you step back a bit from this political theater that's unfolding right now in central Nairobi, it looks like the president is trying to get rid of the vice president. He feels he wasn't loyal enough during the protests. He accuses him of instigating some of these protests and not supporting the government position. If he is really impeached in these hearings that are happening today and tomorrow, I think it will take about 2 weeks for a new vice president to take over. But it also raises questions about how stable this government of William Ruto actually is, how much support he has in the government, because Mr. Gachagua was very important in terms of securing the majorities in parliament.
Let's move on to another story, one that you've spotted in Al Jazeera, staying in Kenya, but a different kind of story completely. Yes. Elephants have outgrown their patch and are needing to upscale.
Yes, I mean, I was actually invited to observe this, but the invitation came in fairly late on Sunday, so I couldn't make it. But the elephant population in the national park in Mwea, east of Nairobi, has gone from a maximum capacity of 50 to 156. The Kenyan Wildlife Service is saying that these elephants are now overwhelming the ecosystem and require relocation, and they're now relocating 100 animals to the Aberdare National Park, which is considerably cooler, I have to say. It's a very, very cool part of Kenya. I wonder how these elephants will be doing there.
Indeed. Do we have any update on them moving into their bigger homes?
I think this is a process that will take a couple of days or weeks, and I'm pretty sure that we will probably get an update once this process is over. But they started with it yesterday. The tourism minister attended this. This is obviously a big tourist attraction here, the wildlife that is in Kenya and is accessible to people all over the country. So it is something that the Kenyan government made sure everyone knows, that elephants have been doing rather well in Kenya. And now need a bigger ecosystem.
Indeed, I mean, how much of a part do Kenyan elephants play in the overall tourism infrastructure?
I would say they play a very big part. It's one of the reasons, not just the elephants, but the wildlife overall, is one of the reasons why it's so attractive to people who want to go on safari, want to see these animals in their natural habitat. And it is, I think, testament to the efforts the Kenyan government has made over the last 30 years to address poaching, to address human-wildlife conflict. And I think it has been reaping the rewards, but if you look at the tourism numbers.
Navina Kotor, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. The time here in London is 7:30 a.m. You're listening to The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. Let's have a look at what else we're keeping an eye on today. The US has given Israel 30 days to increase the amount of access to humanitarian aid to Gaza or risk a cut in military assistance. It's the strongest worded warning yet from Washington as Israel steps up its offensive in northern Gaza. The US claims Israel has interfered with 9 out of 10 humanitarian efforts between the north and the south in the last month alone. Meanwhile, Israel has launched another airstrike on the Lebanese capital, Beirut. Witnesses described 2 blasts in the south of the city. The US says it opposes Israel's approach to bombing Beirut. North Korea says that around 1.5 million young people have applied to join a return to the army this week alone. Pyongyang says South Korea sending drones to fly over the north has brought a tense situation to the brink of war. And the latest US presidential poll gives a Democrat candidate Kamala Harris a slight lead over Donald Trump. The poll by Ipsos Mori suggests that voters, and particularly Democrats, may be more enthusiastic about the election than they were this time 4 years ago. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. 8:31 a.m. in Paris, which is where we head now, and the big beasts of France's motor industry played a clever trick this week. With no one really quite there yet when it comes to committing to electric cars, what better an idea than to wrap them up in a package that we all recognise and love. So welcome back to the resurrected Renault 5, but in electric form. And to tell us more, I'm joined now from Paris by Simon Bouvier, who's Monocle's Paris Bureau Chief. A very good morning to you, Simon.
Morning, how's it going?
Very well, thank you. And all this happened at the Mondial de l'Automobile.
That's right. It opened on Monday, where we had a very busy press day. That's when I went, and then to the public on Tuesday. And obviously, the stars of the show are the big French manufacturers, including Renault Group and Stellantis, the Franco-Italian, German-American giant. And the big question was, how are the Chinese car makers going to react to all of the tariffs that the European Union has been putting on electric cars manufactured in China? And the answer is they were there. A lot of them, including BYD, one of the biggest ones, had impressive stands at the auto show. So they're here to stay.
What did the French automotive world say about the EU tariffs imposed last week? I know that the German automotive world were not happy at all.
Yes, well, I think it's a mixed bag because there are manufacturers like the Renault Group who say that, the ambitious objectives or regulations really of the EU that say that no vehicle that emits emissions can be sold in the European Union starting in 2035. They say that's too soon and there's no time for them to transition. And there are others like Stellantis who are saying, well, if we can't beat them, then let's join them, and who are creating partnerships with Chinese car makers so that they can exchange technologies and kind of get into that magic less than 20,000 euros segment for a new electric car, which is what everybody is striving to get to.
And it is something that arguably the French would be quite well positioned to do, given the fact that historically the cars that they make fit very neatly into that category. They don't make the super luxe cars like the likes of BMW. So where does the French automotive industry stand at the moment? I mean, I mentioned a moment ago that the repackaged Renault 5 is that their tactic?
It is, but I think, to borrow, as I was telling Chris Chermak the other day, to borrow an expression from a colleague of ours at the French business daily Les Echos, if real estate is mantra is location, 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 then for the electric car game, the mantra is pricing, pricing, pricing. Right now, there's been a kind of well-publicized slump in electric car sales because all the early adopters who are very into electric car technology are already driving one, and the rest are holding off on adopting electric because they're waiting for more affordable options. So the French are well positioned because historically they have made these mass market models, but the electric technology, making it cheaply enough to get into that magic number that I mentioned, the 20,000 euro segment, it's not quite there yet. So that's the problem. And the Chinese product from Chinese manufacturers is very good. Embattled Stellantis CEO Carlos Tavares even said that he thought that the technology was equal, if not better, but 30% cheaper in Chinese electric cars.
And do we believe that the repackaged Renault 5, and indeed I think the Renault 4 is coming back as well in electric form?
That's right.
Do you think that will convince people? I mean, when you see the car, does it give you that warmth of recognition and therefore that trust that you give to a car that is something that you want to buy?
Yeah, I think we shouldn't underestimate the power of design and of branding. And that's where the European car makers in general, including the French ones, have the advantage when it comes to convincing their home consumers. We saw that Fiat, about 20 years ago now, revived the Fiat 500. It was a huge hit. I think it's a tried and true tactic, and they're more attuned to the tastes of the consumers in their home markets from a kind of design and aesthetic standpoint. So it's definitely, they're hoping that it's going to be a big boost, but then they're going to have to bring costs down as well. And that's going to be the kind of magic formula that will allow them to survive in this new era of Chinese competition.
And then we have to have the big infrastructure debate, don't we? Because, I mean, if you walk around the streets of Paris, you don't see many plug-in points. And if you step out of Paris, one wonders, a country which has an incredibly good train network may absolutely need to be able to step up in terms of its provision for the new generation of electric cars. Where are we?
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the top concerns for consumers who haven't adopted electric cars yet is, this range anxiety, as they call it. Am I going to run out of juice halfway to my destination? But I do think that objectively on the ground, the situation has changed a lot from where it was at even a few years ago. I think in France, in most, if not all, petrol stations, you have charging stations. The infrastructure in Europe lagged behind what it was in the US, for instance, until very recently. But now we've caught up. So I think the infrastructure side of things is not as big of a inhibiting factor objectively. But I think there's still work to do to convince consumers that it's okay. They're not going to get stranded just because they picked this technology over the good old-fashioned internal combustion engine.
Finally, Simon, as our Paris bureau chief, on what is looking to be a very balmy day in the French capital, it's going to be boiling. What's on your list of things to do and things to look out for?
Well, today I'm going to try and make the most of the beautiful day, as you said. Unfortunately for us, October and November is usually pretty gray, so you're going to get all the rays of sunshine that you can get. And the art market season is really picking up steam. October and November are huge months for that, so there may or may not be a few gallery visits in my future today.
Simon Bouvier, thank you so much for joining us on the line from Paris. You're listening to Monocle Radio. Now, last week, the 2024 Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to Nihon Hidankyo, a grassroots Japanese organisation of atomic bomb survivors. 2 years ago, the co-recipient was Alexandra Matvichuk, head of the Centre for Civil Liberties, documenting Russian war crimes against Ukraine. Well, Alexandra, now in Lviv to host a panel on democracy for the city's annual book forum, caught up with Monocle's Julia Lassica to discuss the subject of her talk, as well as her reaction to this year's Peace Prize.
I compare freedom with oxygen. When you have oxygen and you can breathe, you don't think about freedom. And this is something which is going on in some part of the globe where people get used to live in developed democracies and started to take freedom for granted. They inherited democracy from their parents. They don't understand the importance of freedom. And they start to perceive freedom as a possibility to make a choice between different cheeses in supermarket. And that is why they start to easily exchange their freedom for something else, first and foremost, for their own comfort. And this is a very dangerous situation because problem with freedom globally is not that, in fact, that authoritarian countries, the space for freedom is shrinking to the size of the prison cell. The problem is that even developed democracies, the political forces calling into the question the Universal Declaration of Human Rights again weight.
How do we restore that sense of urgency? How do you bring urgency back to people who've sort of, in the way you're describing it, almost sort of fallen asleep in that kind of luxury of freedom?
I wish I know the answer, because when it's become obvious that freedom is very fragile, it can be too late. Let me refer to the data. This year, half of population on the earth goes to election. But don't be an illusion. 80% of people in the world live in non-free or partially free societies, which means that just 20% of people globally have a real right to vote for whom they want to vote, have a real right to say what they want to say, have a real right to choose what God they want to pray and whom they want to love. So these people are minority, and we live in very turbulent times when the world order, which is based on UN Charter and international law, is collapsing before our eyes. And it's very easy to predict that fires like wars and acts of violence will be emerged more and more often in different parts of the globe because the whole international wiring is faulty and sparks are everywhere.
If we zoom in on one of those countries that is going to the polls, it's going to be Georgia in just a few weeks' time at the end of October. And Georgia has a very similar situation to Ukraine in many ways. And this is something you talked about on the panel as well. You talked about EU integration, which both Georgia and Ukraine are striving for, is a lifeline for your country, for Ukraine. Could you tell us about whether the EU has a responsibility to be bolder, because many people are arguing that it hasn't been bold enough, for example, in Ukraine, in Georgia, and so therefore we have these sort of issues going on, including, aggression from Russia. Is there a responsibility for democracies, strong democracies, to help those around them increase their own strength?
I would like to express my solidarity with people in Georgia who are fighting for their freedom and for their human dignity. We know what does it mean to face with a pro-Russian, authoritarian and corrupt government. We was in the same situation just 10 years ago, and that is why Revolution of Dignity started, which underlined the path for people in Ukraine for Euro-integration. So I wish people in Georgia success, because their fight, it's our fight.
And if we turn to the Nobel Prizes that have been announced over the last few days, of course, 2 years ago you won the Nobel Peace Prize along with two other co-recipients. This year, the recipient of the Literature Prize, the South Korean author Han Kang, said she didn't want to celebrate or hold a conference because of all the wars going on in the world, including in Ukraine, which you mentioned directly. I guess there's a sort of subversion that's going on there with the prize. The prize is meant to be a sort of a moment of celebrating someone's work and someone's achievement. But do you think maybe by subverting it like that, she's actually adding in urgency to the prize, and maybe an urgency that you felt also when you received it?
The Nobel Peace Prize provides us the opportunity to be heard, because for decades the voice of human rights defenders from Ukraine, from Russia, from other countries in our part of the globe wasn't heard. And with this decision of Nobel Committee, we finally was in a situation when the rooms where political decisions are taking places started to be open for us. And this is very essential. And I have a huge respect to the words of this writer, which received the Nobel Prize from Literature this year. And as Ukrainians, I know that the world is very interconnected, and North Korea sent to Russia more than 1 million artillery shells. We see how Iran supports Russia, Syria supports Russia, China supports Russia. We observe the formation of entire authoritarian bloc, and if authoritarian countries support each other, people from countries who believe in freedom and democracy have to support each other even stronger.
That was Alexandra Matvichuk in conversation with Julia Lassica. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
We head now to Singapore, where its Design Week has come to a close with this year's theme, People of Design, celebrating everyday visionaries shaping our society through design. Monocle sent Adam Hancock to take a look at the future of design and the role it'll play in emerging tech, sustainability and care.
The future is somewhat of a daunting prospect. Technology is advancing at breakneck speed, and the lines between the physical world and the digital world will soon get even more blurred. It can all feel a little overwhelming, but such change does create opportunity. Designers will be critical in using new technology to shape our future and tackle the biggest challenges that are heading our way. The role of design in emerging tech has been discussed by leading experts from across various industries at the Design Futures Forum in Singapore. One of them is Kathy Hackle, a tech futurist who is known as the godmother of the metaverse.
We went from desktop computing, where computers were on our desks, to mobile computing, where computing goes everywhere with us, and we bring that intelligence with us. What you're going to start to see is computing expanding into the physical world, and that is spatial computing, right? With spatial computing comes spatial computers and devices that are spatially aware, that have spatial audio, or that can see and understand the physical world, and also start to eventually be more useful to humans in the physical world, right? So it's going to be able to remember things for you. It's going to be able to eventually, maybe even, through robots or virtual beings, do more things for us in the physical world.
Interesting. And I know you are called the godmother of the metaverse,
yes.
Which is a great title. I'm keen to know more about where we're kind of up to with the metaverse. How close is it to being a situation where, people are starting to be more involved in it?
That concept of the metaverse is still being worked on, and we haven't arrived. I don't think it's going to be like one day in 2030 or in 2035, we're going to say, oh, we've arrived at the metaverse that's been created. But it'll be a process. It'll take years. It'll take a lot of different technologies, right? It's hypercharged by AI right now, but that's not the only technology that is needed in order to create these, virtual shared experiences in the physical world.
So it sounds to me that we're going to be living a lot more of our lives online.
It's more like you're going to add a data layer into the physical world that you're going to be able to see. I'll give you an example. This is one of the best examples I give anyone. It's like, if you go to a Taylor Swift concert or a Beyonce concert, everyone is living the concert through their phones, right? But is that truly enjoyable? No, the idea is to be there in person and enjoy it. So when you start to break free of those rectangles on our desks and our hands and start to bring data into the physical world, you start to see it, possibly through glasses, or you could hear it through, AirPods, or you'll see it through maybe contact lenses in the future, right? But you start to become a little bit more present to the experience in the physical world, not living through a rectangle. So you're going to add a data layer that we already engage with on a constant basis on our phones, but we're looking down at. You're going to put that heads up into the physical world.
These staggering advances in technology present a challenge for designers. They have to figure out how they can be used as a force for good. Take artificial intelligence as an example. There are seemingly endless possibilities in what it can do. But how can we use it to truly benefit us? Well, one company has been working on ways to harness the power of AI for education. If you've ever tried to learn a new language, that sound might be familiar to you. It's from the Duolingo app. Their hugely successful platform is used by millions every day, and they've recently added a new subscription service which allows users access to new ways of learning, all thanks to AI. I caught up with their senior product design manager, Megan Benazek.
We have this one feature which just launched actually a few weeks ago that we call Video Call. We're able to practice real-time speaking and conversation.
Can we take a look at it then in action? I know you're learning French at the moment,
yes.
So you can speak with your new French friend.
Yes, I'm going to say, or warning to anybody listening to this, very beginner French here, so please don't crucify me for my accent here.
It'll be better than mine.
All right, let's go. Let's do a video call.
Salut, ça va?
Salut Lily, ça va bien. Et toi?
Ça va. Parlons plus de voyager. Tu préfères voyager en été ou en hiver?
Je préférais voyager en hiver.
Brilliant. So you're having a conversation with your new French friend there,
yes.
And she seemed a little maybe moody. Is that on purpose? Is that a character trait of hers?
Oh yes, that is the perfect way to describe Lily. So we on Duolingo have a bunch of different characters, and these characters show up all across the app. Lily is a bored, kind of sarcastic, angsty, moody teenager. Okay. And we actually thought that she was the perfect speaking partner because she is a little bit intimidating. And when you're talking to a native speaker, you're speaking in this language that you're learning, it does feel kind of intimidating. Sometimes people aren't as forgiving as you'd want them to be.
And how did you train these characters? How does this work? Like, how do you train them to be able to have a conversation with you?
We'd already built all of these narratives around the characters. And with features like Video Call, we now have the ability to bring that to life through AI. But because we don't have control anymore, right? Before we could write the scripts for them, we could control exactly what they said. Now we have to train the AI to do that for us. So what we did was we created these character info packs, as we like to call it. So baked into the prompts that we write are all this information about the characters themselves. So the AI is able to speak for Lily, speak like a moody teenager.
And do you think this is the future of language learning?
Absolutely. And I think we're just scratching the surface, right? The more that we can make, this learning contextual and more personalized to each individual learner, the better and more impactful it can be.
From my brief meeting with Lily, the moody French teenager, it's clear that designers are going to use this new technology in very imaginative ways. But with so many possibilities for where this tech could take us, it can be hard to predict what is going to happen next and the new problems that will crop up. Luckily, we have tech futurists like Kathy to do that for us.
Once you have computing expanding into the physical world, once you have these new devices and all these sorts of things, right, you start to think about the world as a canvas, right, which is beautiful, but it also becomes real estate. The physical world becomes a canvas for that virtual layer, but it also becomes real estate. So you start to have really important questions as to who owns the air around you. No one's thinking of virtual air rights, but that keeps me up at night because that's who I am, a tech futurist that thinks ahead. But who can put things within your eyesight and earshot? What you can hear and what you can see in front of you once you have these devices, who actually owns that space? So that starts to create a lot of questions around for governments, for cities, for designers, for companies.
Virtual air rights, stroppy French teenagers, and smart contact lenses. Being a human in an increasingly digital world is certainly going to be an interesting experience. For Monocle Radio in Singapore, I'm Adam Hancock.
Thank you very much indeed, Adam. You're listening to The Globalist. finally, a quick architecture roundup. I'm joined now by Tim Abrams, contributing editor to the Architectural Record. Good morning, Tim.
Good morning, Emma. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Terrified by that French stroppy teenager on the last item. So let's press ahead to the joys of Belfast Grand Central Station. This is
let's go to Belfast.
Thing. Let's go to Belfast. What's going on there?
Belfast, the largest transport hub in the island of Ireland, is just being opened there. A £340 million station. It's an industrial-looking structure. Doesn't look very enticing from the outside, but inside it's this huge increased capacity of transport space, 10 times bigger than the previous structure that it replaces. This means that the possibility of much greater connections between the Irish capital, Dublin in the south, and Belfast in the north of Ireland is going to be increased. It will allow for far more cross-border trains in the future. These cities that have been connected in a difficult way through 75 eventful years are going to be brought together. There's a greater opportunity for more trains between the two of them and journey times to decrease, given that the UK mainland is struggling to achieve high-speed rail. This is going to be a nice, positive, interesting reversal of the narrative, I think.
Let's talk about the way that it looks. You mentioned that it's industrial and it's inspired by the glorious engine sheds that used to stand on the site. But just looking at some people, the reactions from some people, a lot of them incredibly happy that they've now got this glorious new infrastructural gift. One guy saying, I'm so used to driving and getting the bus, I'm actually quite excited about getting the train, which is always joyful. But one person said, the new station is lovely, but it looks like an airport because it's so big. It raises the question, do large transport infrastructure hubs have to be ugly?
I'm not sure I would say it's ugly. And I think it's one of these experiences that you have to be in it when it's absolutely full. Or not absolutely full, but busy. It's only just now that the trains are beginning to move. There's also an attached bus station, and it's all across one grade. I think one of the things that there is a certain sense of a typology adjustment. We are used to railway stations looking like railway stations, and airports are a different continuum. And yeah, it does have I would agree with that. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think actually one of the aspects that we like to see in transport infrastructure or any kind of infrastructure at the moment is capacity, a sense of space, a sense that the opportunities that we have at the moment can be expanded in the future. There's space to move forward into. It's a positive and a kind of a much forgotten aspect of kind of modernist design, where things were big and places were things you could move around in freely.
Wonderful stuff. You've just come back from the Netherlands.
Indeed. Now there's a place which has capacity.
And some very beautiful train stations as well.
Very beautiful train stations. The one in Eindhoven is great. It's of the 1950s, a modernist design, beautiful place. And I'd never been to Eindhoven before, but it is the site of the Dutch Design Week, although Dutch covers the whole of the country. It is focused in Eindhoven. In Eindhoven I didn't realize this, but Eindhoven was formerly effectively a company town run by electronics giants Philips, and they left in the 2000s, and there's a huge parts of the city, particularly an area known as Strip S, which I'd never been to before, which has become a site of creative industry, also very cheap rent, which is another thing to be envious of it being from the UK. But it's the Dutch Design Week really captures the interesting qualities of this space, both the industrial capacity that still resides in the city, even though Philips is left out, but also Design Academy Eindhoven, which I would say is still probably the best design school in Europe. So you have these two things. You have the technology, the industrial base, plus people thinking about great ideas all brought together for this event. And Singapore sounded like a very serious and an interesting proposition, whereas the Dutch Design Week's a bit more fun and a bit more wacky to capture the spirit of the place.
Finally, Tim, we cannot round off the programme without talking about Casio's robot pet, the Moffin.
Indeed, this seems to be an interesting move from everyone's favourite vintage watch manufacturer, Casio. It's effectively a pet, a robo-pet I would say in the guinea pig vein, although it doesn't have a mouth, and I know this is getting into a dystopian territory, but it's another way to think about it would be a cross between a Tamagotchi and a high-end mop. It's supposed to be a pet which responds to you. According to the website, it's got many unique characteristics, including non-verbal communication through chirping, and it's got its own personality. And if that frightens you a little bit too much, it's got a small, controllable size.
Right, that's fine. I can get the Tamagotchi cuteness bit, but the small, high-end mop, you'll have to help us out there.
I suppose I'm just trying to find a way to describe something that is intended to be a robotic guinea pig and trying to find a different way into it. But I guess robotic guinea pig is probably better than high-end mop, although I would imagine when you are holding it, it doesn't feel like a guinea pig. It feels more like a high-end mop. Anyway, I don't know yet. What it is true is that it's designed. This is the kind of way in which AI is going to be inhabiting our personal spaces, because this is a product which is designed to react to individual voice commands, so it can tell who its quote owner unquote is and who someone who just happened to pop round the house to see your Mofflin is. So it will develop its own relationships to other parts of the world, mainly people, owners, pets.
Incredible stuff. And you'll have to order this from Japan now. And I'm now exploring the idea of having something that you can not only use to clean your floor, but have a cuddle with.
I think you are grasping the unseen and uncharted areas where this product might go. Indeed, £300, you still have to order it from Japan. No doubt they will be around by Christmas time.
Tim Abrams, thank you so much for joining us on The Globalist. And that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to the producers Hassan Anderson, Tom Webb and Laura Kramer. Our research was Sana Jumani and our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield, with editing assistance by Steph Chungu. After the headlines, more music on the way. I'll be back with a briefing live at midday here in London, and The Globalist will be back at the same time tomorrow. Hope you can join me for that again if you can. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening.